I think we might be ready. Good evening. My name is Nina Milligan, and I want to welcome you to the Transportation Advisory Board meeting of Thursday, June 18th, 2020. We are meeting remotely, and we have a great deal of business this evening, so I'm looking forward to diving into it. I want to say that public comments will be allowed as they are listed in the agenda. And you can find the instructions for that the easiest way, because there's a call-in number and a meeting code number. The easiest way to do that is to go to issaquah.gov/2902/transportation and click on our agenda, and you'll see the instructions right there. We will get to the audience comments in item number 3. Also wanted to reiterate that we have our board members, we have staff, and we'll be juggling this. This is the first time that I have run a meeting. I've been in many online meetings in the last 3 months. I'm going to tell you, I guess everybody else has to. So please, begging for forgiveness in advance and for any grace and help that you might want to give me along the way to make sure this runs smoothly, but I'll do my best. So to start off the meeting, I'd like to call the roll of the members of the Transportation Advisory Board. And when I say your name, unmute and say here, and then go ahead and mute yourself back again. Cynthia Crass?
Here.
Tom McDonald? I see you. Did you say here? Tom? Tom, can you hear me? There you go. Say here right now. He's not even saying it. Say here, and let's see if I can hear you. I'm going to come back to Tom. I'm here, Nina Milligan. Kobe Sunday?
Here.
Suyata Goyle?
Here.
Stephanie Sailman? I think Stephanie's here. Emma Gruby?
Here.
Thank you. And Tom McDonald, are you here? Wondering how we can help Tom. What do you suggest, Stephen?
He's still working on his audio right now.
So he's here as best as we can. We'll catch him up. Can you hear us, Tom? Tom, can you hear me? Not yet. I'll try to check in with him later. Does that sound okay?
Yep, go ahead, Nina.
Okay. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, and these date to January 27th, 2020. Has everybody had a chance to read them? And do I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 27, 2020? Unmute yourself and say.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Excellent. I think that was Cynthia and
Emma.
Yeah. And I'll call the roll, and you can vote yay or nay along with the motion of approving the minutes of January 27th. Cynthia Crass?
Yeah.
Tom McDonald? He thumbs up, yes. I saw that. Nina Milligan, yes. Kobe Sunday?
Yes.
Yes. Suyata Goyle?
Yes.
Stephanie step in yet? Not yet. And Emma Gruby?
Yes.
That's unanimous in favor. Thank you very much. Ready to move on to the next item, which is the audience comments, public comments.
We actually don't have anybody called in for public comment, but Cynthia has noted that she would like to actually participate for public comment.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes, and I would also like to, for housekeeping, remind everybody to announce who you are, your name, and when you begin to speak. So say your name, this is so-and-so, this is Nina Milligan, and blah, 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 and then say your thing. Okay, sounds good. Cynthia, I'll call on you now, and you have the floor.
Okay. My name is Cynthia Crass, and I live in downtown Issaquah. I just want to say a few words about what's been happening lately. The killing of George Floyd has set off a response like we've never seen before, in which white people are finally beginning to reevaluate what it means to be racist and what it means to be anti-racist. I'm late to the party and new at this, probably know less about this than anybody, but I think it's important to think about this a little bit. We don't need to be intentionally carrying out acts against individuals to be perpetuating systematic racism. Much of the guiding language in our MMP includes aspirational comments about achieving equity in general. We need to examine our work on transportation through the lens of systemic racism and seek to understand how our transportation system contributes to it, and to be more explicit about racial inequity. There's much literature on the topic, and I suggest that we all try to get more educated on this topic. I don't have any specific literature to recommend, but I found a wealth of choices just by searching racism in transportation in a Google search. And there's a lot of material there. And I think I'd like to really encourage us to think deeply about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Are there any other audience comments? Stephen, did you get any other emails or messaging? No? I will therefore close public comments at 6:11 p.m. If you're ready, we'll go into the regular agenda items for this evening, the first of which is the election of the chair and vice chair. And for the record, I'll read in from the agenda packet what it is we're doing. As required by the Transportation Advisory Board's rules and regulations, Article 3, Section 1, Officers, the tab is required to take action on the chair and vice chair positions. Each chair and vice chair will serve a one-year term, which ends on April 30th of each year. The board has not set limits for consecutive terms. At the start of the tab meeting, I will solicit nominations, that's at this section, and conduct election for both offices. Due to this year's unique circumstances, which required canceling multiple board meetings, the city staff had suggested that I, Nina Milligan, and Cynthia Crass continue to serve in the seats that we're in, and we have both spoken with the staff and said that we would be willing to do that. And at this moment, though, I would call for a nomination for chair and vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Nina and Cynthia
For chair and
for
vice
chair
chair.
and vice chair.
Thank you, Suyata. Are there any other nominations this evening? Seeing none, we have one nomination to vote on, and we'll consider that a slate of officers. Nina Milligan as chair, Cynthia Crass as vice chair. So you can vote for both at the same time, and we'll do as we had before. I'll call the roll and unmute yourself and then make your vote. Yay, nay, or abstain. Cynthia Crass?
Yay.
Tom McDonald? Did you do that, Tom? You did. Okay, thank you. Nina Milligan, yay. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom voted in the affirmative visually. Kobe Sunday?
Yay.
Thank you. Suyata Goyle?
Yay.
Emma Gruby?
Yay.
Excellent. I think that's it. That was unanimous. Nina will be your chair. Cynthia will be your vice chair for the next year. Thank you, everybody. I think this will be fun. Cynthia, do you have anything to say in that regard?
No, just it's always a task that's a bit easier when you have really great staff. So thank you to Stephen. I wouldn't have volunteered to go around another round if we didn't have such a capable, competent staff. So thank you. And of course, Nina as the chair is a lot easier to be the vice chair. Thanks.
Well, I certainly second what you said about working with Stephen as staff. You make our lives so much easier, and it is a lot of work, and really appreciate it. Okay, with that, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, the Mobility Master Plan schedule. And for that, we have Stephen Padua, Senior Transportation Planner in the City of Issaquah. The floor is yours, Stephen.
Hi, thank you. So I am going to move to sharing my screen now. So if you want to go back to the full view, I can stop for discussion. Just let me know, and then I will stop sharing my screen so we can kind of go to the full group discussion. Let's see. So for the first item, I'm going to quickly give an update on the master plan schedule. Can everybody see my screen now? Okay. So really quick, I'm going to go through what we've done to develop the mobility master plan. In early 2019, we all worked together and had conversations with the community to work in developing our guiding principles. In all of 2019, the staff and project team worked with our consultant to develop the planning context and future needs reports, some of the materials that you had reviewed before tonight. We also spent a lot of time in 2019 and then some of the time in early 2020 to talk about a lot of the major policies and criteria, the other materials that you saw tonight. And then with the project needs, we had some discussions when we were talking about the major policies and gaps in our system that helped informed a lot of the needs in terms of the type of policies we're going to use to identify new projects. And then we also had some short discussions about outline needs when it comes to what the mobility master plan should look like. We did talk about items that you were expecting to see in the mobility master plan, but also stuff that you felt like you didn't actually need to see. Where with everything going on, we've had to cancel a lot of meetings. So we've actually had to make a huge update to our schedule. And it all starts with having our meeting tonight. Being able to give you time to review a lot of the materials before we move to a full public release of a draft in early July. And then that would be helping prepare us for a July 28th study session with the City Council. And then in late August, early September, we're going to be moving for City Council adoption. The reason why there's two kind of timeframes there is because we're really trying to aim for late August, but if we receive a lot of feedback behind making edits for the mobility master plan, we'll probably be aiming for that early September timeframe. Now for today, what I'm hoping to do when we're going through all the materials is to briefly talk about all of the items that we've talked about before. And with all the majority of the items that you reviewed for tonight, you actually have had conversations about what went into them. This is just the latest reiteration of what we had talked about. We've also a few weeks ago formed a TAB ad hoc committee to help with going through some of these materials, because we're not going to be able to go into very fine detail of what the wording is, how things look. And what I'm hoping to do is have all the TAB members speak tonight and give direction to this ad hoc committee so I can work a little bit closer with them and refine a lot of the materials before we get to the public release. And also with after the public release, when we're just continuing the development of the final draft. You will also get the opportunity in early July to comment on the full draft that gets released. And you also have the public comment period for the July 28th study session with City Council. Although all the feedback that we're collecting tonight and all the feedback we're collecting from the community in early July will go to the City Council in late July. And then right now I'm working on trying to schedule a early August board meeting so that we could come back together. And I can share with you all the feedback that we've collected or received from the community around the mobility master plan. And we could the board can give their recommendation to the City Council leading for the adoption, whether in late August or early September. Are there any questions before I move on to the next agenda item? Not seeing any, so Ina?
Thank you. Sorry, I had to step out for a moment. My internet crashed. Thank you, Stephen. And seeing no questions, my chat cleared, but I don't see anything since I got back in. We'll move on to the next agenda item, the review of the mobility master plan policies and prioritization criteria. This is a discussion item. So after Stephen gives us a presentation, we'll have an opportunity to discuss these things. I might mention here, will be a fairly lengthy presentation, and you might want to ask a question while Stephen goes along. I'll try to follow the chat, and I think Stephen will too, to see if somebody needs to chime in part of the way through. Or do you want to just take little breaks at certain sections?
So actually what I'm going to do, because a lot of these first items we've seen before, I'm just going to briefly describe what they are, and then I'm going to open the floor for all the tab members to ask any clarifying questions or provide comment. There's no actual presentation for this, but I can actually go through the criteria if that helps.
I think an overview would help since we haven't met since January, and it would help our audience as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
So for the project evaluation criteria, and I'll share my screen so I can just bring it up. For the project, there it is. So the criteria is one of the main items that we have seen before. We first saw it late last summer, and then again in the fall when we were talking about refining the policies, but also trying to figure out what our priorities are. The way the prioritization criteria will be used is to score the project list. So we actually have a prioritized project list in the draft plan itself. But it also helps us look at new projects that we come up with in the future to determine how well it's meeting our guiding principles. And again, instead of trying to go through word for word, trying edits, I'm hoping that the tab members can provide a lot more feedback to the ad hoc committee and direction if something doesn't seem right or something needs any type of edits.
Stephen, this is Nina Milligan. Can you remind us of, in this particular context, what are the steps towards approval and the time frame for us to get that feedback to the ad hoc committee or to you?
Right now, it's just providing feedback tonight. So right now, I'll open the floor for everybody to talk about any of the items that either stand out for questions or for comments.
It helps if you say in chat that you have a comment or a question, because then I can call on you. If you haven't, is there anyone who would wish to speak? And remember to introduce yourself when you begin. I'm not seeing anyone, Stephen, but I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Let me ask them. Might inspire some others. In the criteria scoring questions, there's a discussion about capacity on arterials, and I just wanted to understand the definition. Is that you get points for increasing capacity on arterials? You get 4 points. Does arterials include collector arterials?
Stephen, I'm assuming, this is Kendra Brayland, I'm with the consultant team. Nina, I don't actually have an answer to that, but I'd be happy to try to see if I can get an answer to that during the meeting, or we will follow up shortly. That's a really good question. Do you have a preference one way or the other? Just that might help us as well.
Well, they seem to be quite different roads, and I would like to know that in many cases, without looking at the map right now as I'm in this meeting, it does not appear to me that collector arterials should have increased capacity, but I'm not looking at the full inventory, so I'm not sure. But that's kind of the way I was leaning, the reason for my question.
I'm going to look into that. I suspect that we're not using collector arterials. I think it is like true arterials and above is what we're looking at the capacity, because those are more, those are the facilities that really are moving people more regionally and connected. destinations. But we will look into that and either respond back during the meeting or shortly thereafter.
Very good. Thank you, Kendra. And I see that Kobe has a question. Would you like to have the floor, Kobe? Are you ready?
Yes. So my name's Kobe. I was just wondering, this isn't a concern, just a general question. Looking at the criteria, there's like 72 points. And reducing injuries is only 18 points. So if there was a project that might not be the most efficient, but would reduce injuries dramatically, do you think there's enough point allocation towards those projects to get them evaluated at a high enough level to actually get the projects done?
I need to unmute. Yes. When we've had the discussions about how to best balance the points for the criteria, we did actually increase the scoring to where it is now because originally we were trying to have it balanced with the next criteria down, but we added more points because we understood that safety was a little bit higher priority. If the board would like to look at increasing that, we can take a look at that and to rebalance the scoring.
Kobe, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Are there any other questions? I don't see anyone in the chat, but is there anyone just type up? Nope, I don't see anyone. I want to thank you, Kobe, for that question because that relates to another question that I had. Stephen and I had talked about how do we score when you haven't had an accident yet, but you know you would over the course of time because it's a recognized unsafe situation. And so he's working on adding to the scoring an opportunity for recognition of public outcry or public comments about the safety of a intersection or of a place. I have one more comment for the board, and I'm going to do this myself and just didn't have enough time to really fully do this. But while I was looking at this chart, what I thought would be helpful to me, and I'm just going to say it out loud in case it's helpful to others, is that we've got our principles on one side, and then you go through the chart and you go down the path to how many points do you get for that. And I think if I looked back to the principle and see if those points correspond with the principle, that will give you a good filter to see whether the scoring, which is the ultimate product, satisfies the principle that we're trying to achieve. So continue to look at those and send Stephen your feedback after the meeting so that he can finish that up. Stephen, then are we ready to move on to the next part of this section of the agenda?
So now I can jump into the policies. Yeah. So for the policies, very similar to the criteria, we looked at them almost parallel with the whole development of this entire plan. And I'll just show the front page of the memo. Following the development of the guiding principles, we jumped into policy development. We initially started with modal policies to talk about how we want to approach different modes of travel or different options of travel of getting around the city. And then we moved into more overarching policies. A lot of what you read in the memo, what you remember from our meetings, which I think we had 3 meetings talking about the policies, late last summer, late last fall, and then earlier this year, we kind of had a follow-up discussion on the policies that are going in the Mobility Master Plan. The overarching policies, though, are a little bit different than the modal policies, where it's not just one particular mode of travel that we're looking at, and particularly with safety and Vision Zero, it really looks at all the different modes of how people get around and we're really looking at how to prioritize safety under that overarching policy. And then additionally, we also talked about policies on climate change and health and equity that unfortunately, we didn't have ready for this meeting, but that language will be available in the draft plan to talk about how that relates to transportation even further. So just like the criteria, I'm just doing the brief review of what we've done and a lot of the things that we had talked about. I'm hoping that we can, if there are questions or comments, we can point it to the ad hoc committee to look at things a little bit further. Nina, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. So again, I'm going to look for questions or comments from the board on this section, the policies memo, which included not only safety, but the different modes, bike, ped, all those things. And I have a few questions, but I'm looking for someone to say in the chat that they have a question or a comment. And well, until I see one, I'll jump in and ask a question. Stephen, on the safety section, so we were just talking about how in the criteria will have something for identifying an intersection or a facility that is unsafe. And so in here, that sort of language would also have to be in this policy too, right? So when we make changes, they have to go back up to this narrative, right?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm waiting for somebody else to have a question. I have a few if you don't. Okay, I'm going to go into pedestrian mode and ask for you to remind me under, was this tier 7? What? I can't remember what tier it was, tier 2. How did we come to the standard of a quarter mile of sidewalks to a destination?
The quarter mile is a standard of measurement for determining what's actually walkable. When there's been studies around how far people are actually comfortable walking, a quarter mile is actually the distance that is used basically around the country. It's part of the NACTO recommendation or federal recommendations related to what we want to be walkable.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. Sujata has a question. Sujata, introduce yourself and you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Sujata Goel. So I actually also had a question about the pedestrian, and it could be that I may be mixing things up, but so in this one it talks about, so in our policy, tier 1 streets have pedestrian facilities on both sides, and then same with tier 2. And I can't remember. So Newport, near where Bellevue is, that part of Newport, is that considered tier 1? Like, what size of a street is that? I'm curious. And there's a reason I'm asking, so that's why I'm curious. I can't remember, but I remember, so right now, the way it's supposed to be built, we were going to put sidewalks on both sides of the street. And then at one of our public comment periods, one of the, a resident came and said, if you try to put sidewalks on both sides of the street, you're going to create significant environmental impact. And can we do sidewalks on one side and a natural trail on the other? And, so we, looking at the conditions on the ground, we felt it made sense to require the sidewalks on one side of the street and not put them on the other side. And I guess where I'm getting to with this is in these policies, and people love it or hate it. Do we have, and they are policies, but as staff, you're going to look at these and you're going to say, okay, in this situation, I'm supposed to do X, Y. Do I have that capacity? So I guess the question is right now, at the level at which these policies are being written, they provide some guidance, but they still are, they're still pretty vague. They're still, kind of maybe 5,000, 7,000 square foot level. And I'm just wondering, do they provide you all enough guidance that if a resident came to you at staff level who's trying to determine the design, to say, hey, this is the scenario, would you feel that you have enough guidance to move away from something that these policies are saying based on the conditions on the ground? And if not, is there an additional tool you need? Is there some sort of decision-making framework you need for things that don't fit in the box nicely, that we want to add to the policies to allow for transparent and flexible decision-making inside the organization to be able to implement these? That was a really long question. I apologize.
Stephen, it's yours to answer. Thank you, Sujata.
Okay, it sounds like there's two parts to your question. The first being, do we have what we need to answer the question, particularly, and we'll use Newport as an example. The answer is yes. And if a resident were to come to us and ask us, is it going to be one facility, or what type of facility, or is it two facilities and what type? The answer is it's going to be one type of facility for that major arterial outside of the central Issaquah area. The type of facility will be based on the context on the ground. So for areas of Newport where you have a little more density of neighborhood being developed, we're probably going to be looking at a wider facility that can accommodate that type of pedestrian volume. If it's a little more spread out, where you have one driveway going up the hill and all the residences are up the hill and not necessarily directly on Newport, it's probably not going to be as wide of a facility because the demand really isn't there unless the community is asking for it. Now, Newport's kind of unique because we also have connections to trail system. We have the Mountain to Sound Greenway Trail. So the facility is going to be reflecting that too. So potentially on one side of the road, it could be 10-foot wide walkway of some kind or multi-purpose trail to be able to provide that. Now, whether or not we have enough, and then the other part of your question was, do we have enough tools to make changes or be a little more transparent? My answer is yes, but I'll ask Kendra to chip in on, because we've talked about a lot of different policy, the direction we can go with the policy, at least the language that we have.
So I appreciate that question. Can you guys hear me? Making sure. Okay, cool. I didn't know if I was muted or not, and it's made me feel I've almost like just left my mic on because I don't like the beeping every time I come off. I feel like that's distracting for you all. I think, Stephen, I appreciate you. We're developing policies citywide, so that makes it tricky. And I think Sujata, I think you bring up a good point that there are different local contexts that exist within the city that do necessitate different types of treatments. Something that I think would be an enhancement that we could make to the policy framework based on the input we're receiving tonight would be to write in kind of just some more discretionary language that this is the general intent. However, the staff do have the discretion to modify, in certain cases where more warranted, that you can provide an equivalent facility. I think you're providing a great example where we might have a policy that suggests something on both sides of the street, but maybe you can provide something that's much more gracious on one side of the street in some locations. So we have worked with cities to develop that sort of more, I'd say, flexible language, and I think this is warranted in that case. And I would actually point to the vehicular policies. We've already developed kind of that level of flexibility. So I think we could enhance the pedestrian facilities to provide similar levels of flexibility. So I appreciate that input. It's something as we're moving, Stephen, I'm sure showed you, we've got a very aggressive schedule, which we're excited about because I'm excited about getting to an MMP with you guys. But these are kind of some of the touch points that we've really missed over these last several months. So we're glad to have these.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately, like when all of this is adopted, we just want to ensure that all of these conversations, et cetera, provided the tools that staff would need as they're sort of going through this, the slog of designing and implementing projects, that when there is that gray area or that variation, they have the documentation and the tools. So if there is flexibility, like in our auto policy, if there are places where the flexibility is necessary, being clear about what kind of criteria we would, like if it's significant environmental impact or super slopey or cost prohibitive or, whatever it may be, that we can provide that guidance and and the circumstances under which those variations could apply.
Excellent. Thank you, Sujata. And thank you, Kendra and Stephen. I'm not seeing anyone else chime in the chat window. You can say question or comment over there and I'll call on you. I have just a couple more questions I'll ask while I give people an opportunity to get their courage up. Stephen or Kendra, the question has to do with when we have facilities in the policy for having sidewalks on one side. In the case of Newport, that's unique because it's an open space on the other side. But in some cases, there's sidewalk on one side and there are homes or streets or other facilities on both sides. It just doesn't have it doesn't qualify for sidewalks on both sides. If you only have sidewalks on one side, how do you handle safely crossing? And is there a corresponding crossings policy for that?
Stephen, you're muted.
Yep. Thank you for bringing that up, Nina, because it's important to highlight that we have actually had those conversations of updating the city's crossing guidelines and all our crossing policies. And so that is updating that was with the intent to kind of go with these pedestrian way policy updates as well. So when you have sidewalk on one side and you need a crossing, looking at the context of the road type, what the line, the visuals are, the line of sight, how far can you see, is there street lights, like that all is taken into account of the type of crossing or crossing enhancements that are going to be needed to be able to allow people to cross that road comfortably.
Thank you. Stephen, looking for more people with questions? I have a bunch of questions, and some of them are just kind of technical about whether there's an error in a map or something like that. Those kind of housekeeping things I'll just keep for later. But I would ask about let me ask about the bicycle facility map and see if I inspire something out of one of my colleagues like Tom. So we can't hear you, can we? But one of my questions is, exemplified in the bike map that the Issaquah Falls City Road going eastbound from East Lake Sammamish Boulevard is considered a bike route. I would never ride my bike on that. And so it's red, of course, because it's got a low level of safety, right? But how would you ever and why would you ever, when there are alternatives, even upgrade that road to have a high level of safety feeling? Tell me again what that metric is.
Oh, traffic stress is the term. And Nina, you're very correct that it is an extremely high stress facility. I think what we struggled with as a team is identifying parallel alternatives. So the walk and roll plan was actually, I think, the plan that identified that as a bicycle priority corridor. I agree with you that the cost as a city to develop that into something that's welcoming for really any population is pretty astronomical. So I don't think we have any easy answers on that, and that's why we've identified it as a very high stress facility within this plan. And quite candidly, that's why we don't have super aggressive measures to fix it, because we haven't heard that as a priority.
Thank you, Kendra. Yeah, and Tom, I don't think we're able to hear you. Do you want to try to say something?
Hi, this is Tina, City Clerk. Stephen, can you unmute the call-in number for Tom? Because I think you are overriding him. There we go. Okay, Tom, your phone line.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, that's why I haven't been able. Okay.
I'm going to ask one more favor. I'm going to ask Stephen, can you mute the video screen for Tom so that we don't have any?
So I connected without audio when I came back in.
Okay, perfect.
So the audio should be turned off on the computer.
Great. We'll let you manage your volume and mic on the phone line, and Stephen will refrain from muting that so that we don't double mute you. Thank you.
Right. And I'll mute myself when I'm not talking.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Tom, did you have anything that you were just dying to say that you haven't had a chance yet?
Yeah, I'll just delete the typing. And we're talking about Newport Road. And I agree with you, it's a dangerous road. I usually ride on the inside of the curb line going up. So I kind of feel that it's a great location to have a cycle track from 900 all the way up to Lakemont Boulevard, with it all on one side.
Thank you, Tom. I don't see anyone else unless Cynthia, shake your head. Did you want to say anything? You're just agreeing.
No, I had put some things in the chat. Are they not coming up?
No, I'm just wondering if you would like to state your comment, please. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this is Cynthia, and I had a comment about level of traffic stress. But before I give that comment, I just want to say that it is a little bit challenging because we have a lot of documents and we have a lot of overlapping content, and the video call makes it hard to toggle between the different documents. So it's hard to know exactly when to make what comment. So I'll just throw this out there, and I don't know which memo it belongs, which thing it belongs in, but I did have some notes when I reviewed the materials. Forgotten which document it was, but level of traffic stress regarding, so that map, I'm gonna look at it now. So my comments about that were, I don't think anything is steep. So I see Park Drive. So I'm not sure if this is the right time for this, but when I did study that map, and I do ride all these streets, and I don't think anything as steep as Park Drive should ever be green. I mean, I ride a lot, and that's a scary
Which figure are you referring to, Cynthia, so we can look at the same one?
Oh, Park Drive coming down from Highland. You know, when you're coming down.
Are you looking at the figure
I'm sorry,
on the
I'm looking
project?
at figure 3A, level of traffic stress on bike priority corridors.
Okay.
It's so I had a couple comments about this, the rating, the LTS rating or whatever, the actual quantifiable number. So I don't feel like anything that steep should ever be anything less than a 3. And then I think some of them that are 3s are actually 4s, or just like they're just terrible places to ride. And one of them is State Route 900, and another one is the Sunset Interchange, which is one of my big pet peeves because it connects to a lot of green, and that is the intersection when you are at Sunset and you have to cross over I-90. It's a treacherous. And I see a little tiny red dot there between the green and around the highway there. But anyway, that's a terrible, and I'm just wondering if, just like we have like level of service, basically failure, it feels like we should acknowledge some places where it's just never going to be a great place to ride. Like maybe Issaquah Falls City Road, but some of these other ones. Anyway, so I had those were my specific comments on the level of traffic stress. Is that clear enough?
I agree with the 900. I was looking for the Sunset one that you were referring to.
So as you travel westbound on Sunset and you make your way across I-90, at that, and you pick up the trail there, on either side. Pardon?
Steve, can you zoom into that area?
You won't be able to see what the problem is. It's basically just
I'm just trying to get the area.
It's a
Okay.
poor design on both sides of I-90 as you're trying to
Yeah,
cross.
okay.
And I noticed there's a little red dot or a little red extended dot, and that is, I'm not sure what that refers to, but that whole thing is quite treacherous.
So I'm not sure if the intent for that is for everybody to go underneath I-90 or underneath the Interchange Road and take the trail all the way up to the top, and that would be the main bike corridor going up to the top.
And I'm
By
telling you
the
that
trail and not on the street.
I'm telling you, you can't. The trail doesn't go all the way. You cross on the surface. The goes over I-90, and it's sort of partially captured with the little bit red, but that whole thing is pretty red.
Yeah, the trail essentially ends at the crosswalk over the I-90 off ramp.
And the crosswalk dumps you right into a blind intersection where people are coming off I-90, and if they're heading up to the Sammamish Plateau, they're making a channel turn going right, and there's a bunch of bushes, and every single time I cross that, I am terrified.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's what that little red thing is, but on both sides of it, it's terrible, and that's one I think that should be fixed. But then Nina made a point, like, why would you descend Issaquah Falls City Road when there's so many other options? And so there may be ones that we just decide it's not to, it doesn't make sense to invest there. But anyway, the main point I wanted to make was I don't think that anything that has a steep grade should be 1 or 2. And then I think that 900 should be 4. And maybe that section, I don't know. Anyway.
Okay, so I'll get together with Fair and Pearson and look a little bit closer and make sure that the grades are being reflected on here.
And I think the only other point that I would add to that, Stephen, that I think has been made, although it wasn't stressed as much, is just interchanges in general are just really scary places to bike. So I do want to stress that the level of traffic stress is a bad way of saying that, but anyways, that methodology, it uses certain variables. On the whole, for segments, it does a pretty good job of helping you to get a good sense of, how does it feel from a bicycle standpoint? Because again, unfortunately, we can't bike every single street in Issaquah and give it a unique score based on that. That would be best practice, but again, that's not, within our scope of work. However, what I would say is, I think for interchanges, there's a lot of other stressful factors that aren't being captured in the methodology that I think it would be good to recognize. And your point on grade is well taken. I believe we put some consideration into grades, but we'll look into that with Stephen a little more closely.
Sorry, one last comment, and that's I think that one thing that's not reflected on the Newport Way is it has really good line of sight. It's not a terrible place to ride a bike because of the long stretch of straightaway. It's got very good line of sight. I don't have any problem riding that road. I would call it more of a 3 than a 4.
Cynthia, thank you. Did that capture the question you would put in the queue that I messed up earlier in the?
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Kendra and Stephen.
Yes, I'd agree. The long stretch from pretty much Sunset all the way down. Is that the portion? Okay.
Yes.
I'd agree.
I have a question for everybody, and that is that it seems that the LTS chart is based on the walk and roll priority bike corridors. And one of the things that I'm hearing myself and some others say is that we're questioning the corridors that were outlined in the walk and roll plan. What would you do if we're basing this on an earlier policy, but if the earlier policy is faulty, like the Issaquah Falls City Road, what do we do then? Stephen, you want to try to answer that?
I would say when we go to update the walk and roll plan, we should take another look at all the corridors. But that wasn't, overhauling the walk and roll plan wasn't a part of the scope of this project. This was primarily looking at all the priorities in the policy. So that is something that we can take a look at. Ultimately, because the walk and roll plan was done several years ago, and it's going to need another look following the adoption of the mobility master plan.
Great, thank you. I don't see any further.
Sorry, this is Tom. When you say take another look, does that mean looking at all the connections or type of connections then? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any further questions? Tom, do you have any more?
No, I do not.
Stephen, I think we might be able to move from this item. If you want to summarize a little bit before you go into the next item. The next item is the Mobility Master Plan outline, planning context, and future needs assessment.
I think item, right? Cynthia has one last question, actually.
Oh, there you go. I had my head down reading.
It's hard to monitor chat and run a meeting together at the same time. So again, honestly, I don't know where to put this. There's a lot of different documents, and I'm just gonna lay it out there. And that's, I can tie it to some of the specific documents. I made some notes when I was reading them, but there's really kind of an overall thing that touches a few different things. It's in the policy memo about transportation and about parking. And I want to know if, and again, I think we've seen a lot of these materials. This may be a new thought, and I've missed it in the past. Again, it's hard to keep track. But what I want to know is for transit that's outside, so sound transit, do we have any influence over the park and ride facilities that would be around those? Because I think we really want to examine it touches several things, including equity, about investing in parking structures around transit. There's a lot of, I just remember in planning school, a lot of literature around what happens to big transit areas when there's park and rides, for example, versus other kinds of development around. And I think that if we're serious about equity and we're serious about, climate change and carbon emissions and all those things, then we should seriously take a look at whether we want park and ride facilities at new light rail. Or I'm not even sure where to hitch, sort of what different hooks to put this comment in, but I think that it's a habit, and the demand is here now to be able to ditch your car at a park and ride so you can drive to your job, or you can take transit during peak hours to your job in Seattle, which is great, and it's a great place to start for a region. But if you think 10, 20, 30 years, I just think that's investing in an old way of thinking about transportation and thinking about communities. And I don't know exactly where to lodge this comment, but I noticed that some comments in the policy memo, and there was, I don't know, I wrote it to page 23, and I don't remember what document that was. So it kind of touches a few of these documents that we've been presented with.
So sorry, this is Sujata. So Cynthia, are you talking about things like, instead of doing just, massive park and rides at these transit centers, are you talking about like transit oriented development and that kind of stuff? Is that, because
I think that if I would don't park and ride, what else but transit oriented? Otherwise, it's going to turn into a park and ride or a place to ditch your car. So I'm not directly promoting transit oriented development, but I suppose by challenging the concept of massive park and rides, I don't know of other things that are done with transit stop, the land use around transit stops. So I think it's an indirect way of saying transit oriented development. But, we in the suburbs have this habit of building these monstrous facilities, and they're expensive, they're free, the demand exceeds the supply. I'm sorry, yeah, and they're most likely some of the most, these are people who are employed, they go to work every single day, so they have a job, and they are probably more likely to be, they probably index at higher income levels than general transit users. So we give them this thing for free, and it costs a fortune, and the supply cannot keep up with demand. It's just all broken to me. And
So in a way, instead of becoming a destination location for a park and ride for everybody coming into Issaquah, driving in, the park and ride as a destination point to catch some sort of transit, you'd like to see, I guess part of the question is how to get people there to get the transit without having to have their car to get there in a way.
Yes, and there's a lot of information about what happens, 10 and 20 years after a big transit stop has a big park and ride versus some other kinds of just more like what you and Sujata are talking about. And that's what I want to make sure that we're thinking about. And I don't know if we even have that. I mean, is that even in our scope with regard to? I was looking at some of the principles about preparing for for light rail and that sort of thing. I mean, is this? So I guess I'm just wondering if there's even a place for this kind of. I mean, there's two questions. One is, what does everyone else think? And the other is there even a place within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish to insert this kind of thinking?
Well, this is Sujata. I mean, I would definitely agree, Cynthia, with what you're saying about the idea of everybody having to get in their car to get to the transit center, to get on a bus, to get to downtown. That seems like a very odd combination of things. And as you know, I think as light rail comes, we do as a city, I would say, and I think within our transportation plan, if we know where that facility or those facilities are going to go, it would make sense for us to identify, knowing that this is, 20 years in the future or whatever, identify accessible routes of, safe bike routes or safe walking routes. I think when we had that meeting with all those other boards, I remember, I thought they were saying something, the growth management people. I can't remember what that board is
Yes,
called. But I think they had mentioned something about zoning and zone code and density associated with these with this new transit center coming online. But I think, for us in our purview, just ensuring that the policies we write really, the idea that we want more bicycle mobility, safe mobility inside our downtown core. We want it to look like this. That's where the density is going, blah, blah, blah. I think just by creating that kind of network in our downtown core, we're sort of going to be hopefully de facto creating those opportunities once transit does come.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is I think we only have really 4 transit routes that just circulate through downtown, where if you had a parking structure downtown, if you didn't have a parking structure, you'd have to have a wagon wheel spoke up bus network to bring people to that area, which we don't have. That might be the forward-looking thing as far as how do you address the people getting to, for example, the transit station via a bus or another way so they don't have to drive their car.
Yeah, and this is Sujata, sorry, and maybe this is where that policy of the future technology stuff comes in, because like I know at, King County Parks, we're doing the Trailhead Direct, so we're getting these little shuttles that take people from, instead of building massive parking lots at our natural areas, we have these little shuttles that will, come every 15 or 20 minutes and they pick you up at a park and ride. And then they take you to the various natural areas on the weekends. And we've created routes, and it's significantly increased transit use and access to to our gorgeous green spaces in the Mountains to Sound Greenway. So maybe those are the kind of technologies or opportunities that, as that transit center is coming online, we have light rail shuttle or whatever that goes through our communities, or we order one on our phone or whatever. And it starts to reduce some of that need for everybody to own, 3 cars and a house of 2 people and blah, blah, blah.
So I was actually going to Cynthia, thank you for bringing this up, because I was actually going to bring some of this up later when we were going to talk about the planning context report. With the current pandemic, some of the major things that have really been highlighted in all this is that we can certainly change how people get around, or at least how they access, bundles of information or have conversations and still be productive as part of our economy, as part of our system. And I think Kendra and I could probably take up an entire 2 hours just talking about this if we were allowed to. So I will bring this up back again when we're talking about the planning context report, because I think it's important to think about how this current pandemic is really changing how people are getting around or not getting around, and still being able to be productive and still be part of the workforce and still work virtually. The answer to your question, and I think it was a question, not so much a comment, is there are a lot of tools that we can use. So to reduce the need for people to need to drive their car to access transit facilities. And Sujata touched a little bit on with the Trailhead Direct. There's advancement in technology. So you can develop different types of options for people to get from either single family housing or multifamily housing to the transit facilities you have now. But you can also expand on the type of transit system you have beyond just the standard metro bus routes that you see going down, a couple blocks away from your house. Metro can partner with different types of third-party vendors that provide, scooters or bike share, or even with Uber and Lyft. Now we're moving into much more of a virtual world. How much of a need is there for that, and which direction do we go? Our land use hasn't changed, so the needs are still there, but the demand is definitely changing, especially as we see how employers are responding to the recent pandemic. Now I'm gonna stop myself there in case anybody else had a comment, but I just wanted to quickly respond to your question before I forgot what the question was.
Are there any questions? Go ahead, Cynthia.
I was going to say there is a specific question buried in there, and that's the next major opportunity to impact the existence of massive park and rides at suburban transit locations is light rail. Do we, as part of this process, have any input into, or does the city of Issaquah in general have input as to whether that stop will be accompanied by a massive park and ride like Eastgate, or does the city of Issaquah get to decide, and does this transportation plan have any input as to on that particular, that seems like a big trigger to me, like that it's so far in advance that now's the time to be having that conversation, but I don't have any idea where that decision gets made.
Pre-pandemic, the natural process for how this would be is, yes, we would have a say on where facilities go, what the route might be, but the Sound Transit Board and staff are the ones that make the final decision on where the routing is, where the final stations are. But as a community partner for this route, we have a very strong influence on where stations should go and how access should be developed as part of that system.
And whether it's accompanied by a gigantic park and ride or not?
Correct.
Okay.
Stephen, I don't want to chime in too much here, but as a part of the MMP, you'll notice our transit policies, they're not super extensive at this point. Cynthia, I think you're asking some really, really good questions. One of when Stephen and I were scoping this project and talking about it, is that transit is obviously a really important topic that could be addressed in much more detail than fits within this scope. And so I think, something that Stephen has previously mentioned that, he's thinking about is more of a transit implementation plan that's specific to transit accommodations within Issaquah, how Issaquah is a sound host to transit, which includes a variety of, just to respond to your comment on massive parking garage or local connections to transit, be it bicycle and pedestrian. TOD was a sound idea, different first last mile connections. We've worked with some cities that have actually asked the question, do we want to build a big parking garage? Would it be cheaper just to give everyone vouchers to be able to use TNCs to access? And how long, how many rides would that actually fund before building another parking space? And suspense killer here is the answer is a lot. So I think there's a lot of choices there. We don't have the answers. We haven't delved that deeply yet. I think that's something that in the coming years, probably I'm not gonna speculate on a time frame from Issaquah or from Stephen's team, but I think that is something that's an interest to the city, and as a part of the MMP, we've been expecting that that's going to be kind of a next step implementation item.
Yeah, to add on what Kendra said, and then I'll just take one more minute and then we can move on. The original plan and the plan is still to have deeper conversations on transit following the adoption. We intentionally did not have those conversations because we knew they were going to be extensive. I mean, we are wanting to have community conversations around station planning, around what type of access we want to light rail or high speed, high volume transit facilities. And so being able to do that, we wanted to be able to focus on just that as separate from the master plan. So we can focus on the master plan first and then jump into those deeper transit conversations. How that's going to happen now, we're not entirely sure yet, because Metro doesn't even know what recovery, and Sound Transit don't even know what recovery look like. And they haven't even finalized their forecast models yet. So until all that is done, we can have initial conversations, but those bigger conversations, you're gonna have to wait until we know what recovery looks like, and then we have a better idea of what after recovery looks like.
Okay, this is a great discussion, Cynthia. I really want to thank you for bringing that up. Excellent topic, and one that you asked what we thought of it, and I agree with you. I'm glad you brought it up. I would say to Stephen that since Cynthia was pointing out where did this come from, transit is only one application for large-scale parking facilities, and I think Cynthia may also be saying that the use of land for parking may in and of itself be something that we look at, not just as a complement to a transit center, but what is our policy about parking facilities? And maybe we could look at that sooner and get a feel from the community and from the city about how we could make things develop the way that we want them to develop into the future.
Right.
Thank
This is Tom, and probably maybe another thing to tie into the parking center is if it could be used for multiple things as opposed to just parking for transit. If the parking for local business, parking for people commuting to Seattle, parking for Costco, a single facility that could have multiple uses, as opposed to one just for transit, another parking lot for Costco, another parking lot for somebody else. And,
right. We could also have
design
design standards.
if you are going to have it, at least you could combine it with other uses.
Okay, good. We want to have that conversation sooner rather than later, Stephen. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, so the next item was, are y'all ready? Any objections? No objections. Next item is the MMP outline, planning context, and future needs assessment, correct? Stephen, it's yours.
Sure. It's fairly short. Is it helpful for me to actually put this on the screen or just to quickly talk about it and then open the floor? What would you prefer, Nina?
I'd like it on the screen. We're watching it now, but we may be watching it again later. Other people may watch it in the video form. There are a lot of people interested in our project, so let's help them.
Okay. So for the outline, we try to keep the outline very simple and very straightforward. we want to start with an executive summary to simplify a lot of the main messages that we are really trying to convey as part of the master plan. We've heard the feedback from the board members that having something, especially up front, that's very simple, has a lot of graphics, but is able to tell the story of what we're trying to achieve with the master plan is we're hoping to convey that in this executive summary. Following the executive summary, we have the introduction and the process. We're telling the story of how we got to where we are today with the policies and the master plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking about the planning context and future needs, really displaying what the city, what the transportation system Issaquah looks like today, and applying the guiding principles to that to show what we need, or at least what we're missing to achieve our goals. So my questions actually about that outline is, are we missing anything based on previous conversations we've had about with the outline, or does anything seem unclear?
Go ahead and put in the chat whether you have a comment or a question. Love to call on you. Stephen, can I bring into for the conversation? This has two parts. There's the outline, and then there's the planning context and future needs. So the next part of this agenda item is that kind of middle, or 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth section. Is that correct? Am I getting my my understanding?
That's correct.
Any questions out there? I had a question about guiding principles. I'll ask, kind of seed this a little bit. So when you get into the planning context and future needs, it's not for many pages, but they are part of the upfront in the executive summary. Is that right?
Yes, the guiding principles will be outlined in the executive summary, but more importantly, they'll be part of the planning context, or at least the introduction of, we had these conversations and we determined these are what we find it important for our transportation system.
Okay, and Tom has a question, so let me call on Tom. You can state your question and flesh it out for us.
Sure. I was looking at, I wasn't sure if the guiding principles, is that where the policies that we've been talking about, is that where that would be located? Just trying to look through the major titles of the.
So under, in the section under introduction, when we're talking about why develop the TMP now and give that story of the feedback we got from the community, we concluded with what the guiding principles being the ultimate goals that we're trying to achieve. But the guiding principles are embedded in all of the policies and the criteria that we'll be using.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there was a specific place that would be called out so they could read through those and have a, like at the beginning, so they could see what all our guiding policies were as far as how we did the evaluation. And you said that throughout the document, is there one area that they that's really clear for them, or is it?
Yeah, so it'll be called out specifically in the executive summary, but it'll be even more called out in terms of like how they were developed, and list them all out in the introduction as well.
Okay.
Any other questions? I have one more. Even on the end of the outline, it says prioritized project list. Is that, how are we getting to that? And
sure.
Tell me.
So the project list that we're going to be looking at later tonight, that is not the prioritized project. That is just the general full project list as we've been able to collect it. They're separated in different categories, but the criteria that we've been going over and we got review of tonight, we're going to apply that criteria to those projects and score all the projects. And that's how we'll come up with the prioritized project list.
When would do we see that, and what's the life cycle of that getting to some kind of approval or use?
After tonight, we will work with the ad hoc committee with going through the prioritized project list, making sure there's enough language that things seem clear. And then we're going to move to the public release of the draft plan in early July. That'll be kind of the first opportunity for the full tab to be able to see the full prioritized project list.
Thank you, Stephen. I don't see anybody else in the chat box. We're not going very far, though. We're just going to the second part of this, moving from the outline to the planning context and future needs. If you're ready, Stephen, we'll go to that. And if any of you have questions about the list itself, just say so in the chat window, please.
Sure. Okay, not seeing any questions. I'll briefly describe the planning context and future needs. The planning context is our assessment of existing conditions. It lays out our transportation as it looks today, and it specifically looks at each of the travel modes and travel behavior of how our community gets around. And the future needs assessment is taking a different picture of applying our guiding principles to our existing conditions and describing what we're currently missing to meet our own goals of the system in accordance with the guiding principles. Is there anything specific that you want me? Well, actually, should I just open the floor now and go to specific sections where there's questions and comments?
Sure, we can do that.
Sure.
Looking in the chat for some questions. And I can ask one to kind of get it started. Throughout the paragraphs, Stephen, I'm calling it in my little notes here, commentary. In some of this, there's an opinion about what something means or why it's significant or whatever. How was this composed and those kinds of assessments made in the narrative?
Is there a certain section that you're referring to, or?
You know, on the fly, I don't know if I can come up with it that quickly. When you go down into scrolling down into the paragraphs, though, where it says that what we have is good or is adequate or is we have high quality, we have a really walkable community or whatever. You know, when something gets that a qualifier rather than just saying what it is. You know, you say in some instances you say we have so many miles of something. Now that's just a fact, but in some cases it says we have a really good system, you know, or we have a really bad system. You know, when those words are used, where does that come about? And can we maybe clean that up?
Are you talking about?
Let the data speak for itself.
I see.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the commentary, or at least the descriptions of the data, is using, you know, our assessment, comparing with what we see as good facilities versus bad facilities. I guess one example is looking at our grid system in Central Issaquah or versus Old Town. I guess one of the descriptions that is in here is that there is a better grid system in the Old Town area versus the Central Issaquah, because we have a little more road system to be able to connect, whether it's vehicle traffic or if it's pedestrian bicycle. That gives us better options for how we can better connect the neighborhood. With Central Issaquah, we're limited on a lot of areas to be able to better connect, which is why some new projects are being proposed to create new connections. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does a little bit. And I think what I'll do is go back and look at it, and maybe others might see something of what I'm looking at.
Okay.
And then you have another question?
Oh, no, I was just going to respond to you. I mean, there's professional judgment that was put in there, you know, Fair and Peer staff right now as the primary author, although we've benefited from a lot of edits and guidance from Stephen. You know, I would say we have tried to draw some conclusions to make the document readable and to, you know, kind of synthesize some ideas. I was making sure we didn't in anywhere say that something was bad or good, and I'm glad to say we didn't quite use those terms. But to the extent that you feel like we've drawn an inappropriate conclusion based on, you know, kind of your local knowledge, we certainly welcome that input. Oh, looks like we've lost Stephen.
Uh-oh, Stephen, come back. He might still be there. He might have just walked. Oh, no, he's got a yellow thing. Stephen?
Are you thinking about, this is Tom, are you thinking about the, why there isn't a roadway network grid like south between Sunset and Second, and why we don't have something over in the Tibbetts Valley growth area, something similar to that?
No, Tom, what I was thinking was the language used in the narrative
Okay.
and I think that the staff and Kendra have explained it, that there were, based on expertise, certain qualifications that they're sharing in a readable fashion in the plan. And I think it is an appropriate invitation to say that if any of it doesn't ring right to us, that we should say so. So when you're reading it, if there is anything like that, then go ahead and say something about it. Kendra, I'm going to ask a question while we wait for Stephen. Can anyone text Stephen? Oh, his computer crashed. Oh my gosh, coming back soon. Okay, I have a question for Kendra that I think you can answer.
Okay.
It has to do with our review cycle. And in here, there are timeline expectations that are on pages a little deeper in the document. But given the COVID emergency and the stay at home and the changes and not yet coming back, do we have a review cycle for this embedded in the document so that whatever we might make expectations of today could be easily and not too far down the road corrected if things don't go the way we think they're going?
And we got Stephen back. I see, that was a fast boot. Just in terms of, so Stephen, the question that Nina had asked us is about a review cycle. So Nina, what I understand we're working under is that, you know, we have a week by week schedule of pieces that we're giving to Stephen because of course, documents are going through consultant review and then staff review, and eventually up to, sounds like TAB, and ad hoc review. I know we've got, Stephen shared that the intention is for a draft. And what I don't know, Nina, and hopefully Stephen can elaborate, is at what point we need ad hoc review comments so that they can make it into that early July draft.
Let me clarify my question. It more regarded the timelines that are stated and expectations of certain things getting done in 10 years or 20 years or 15 years, whatever they are. How often do we review this document? Do we review it in 1 year? Do we review it in 5 years? And the reason that I bring that up is obvious because we should have something like that. But the other is that we're in such a state of unknown right now with the COVID emergency stay-at-home impacts not yet fully felt, and we certainly have not yet recovered from them. So what would be our review of a final document to see if what we thought was going to happen is happening, especially due to the COVID emergency and the impacts on transportation? So whoever wants to answer that, Kendra or Stephen?
Well, I'm going to let Stephen elaborate on that because I mean, what you're talking about is definitely far beyond the extent of our contract. I would say that most communities do revisit their transportation plans every 5 or so years to confirm that they've said the right things. However, Nina, you're bringing up a great point. We are at an inflection point for travel modeling and forecasting. And I think you're making a point that the world is changing so much that what we're saying today, I don't know if we know if the trends that we've relied on for a long period of time, if those are going to persist. So, Stephen, I'm going to stop talking here and let you go.
So I think I heard most of the question. Can you hear me okay? Okay. The question that I heard was, how often are we updating the plan, particularly because the pandemic has really changed how our system is being used. Typically, the master plan is updated probably every 5 to 7 years, parallel to a comp plan update. Because we are replacing the transportation element of the comprehensive plan with mobility master plan, we would be providing updates along with the other sections. Now, with that said, our comp plan does get occasional updates every year. There's no reason why we can't continue to take a look, particularly because of the pandemic, to look at new data, because even though our land use hasn't changed, the demand has shifted. There's going to be a lot more people working from home in the near and potentially long-term future. That's going to be impacting how our system's being used and where the needs are going to be needed. And especially with looking at equity, the needs are going to be significantly different in our community and the communities around us. So I think it's going to be important to be taking a look at this fairly regularly until the system is a little more calmed down. I know it's not a very straight answer. Yes, we're going to update it every 2 years, but it is very much kind of playing it by ear with how everything goes with the recovery and post-recovery.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions about context and future needs? Seeing none, I think we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, the Mobility Master Plan project list. And again, Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm having to pull everything back up again. So give me a quick minute. And I apologize for that. My computer just completely crashed.
Same thing that happened to me early on in the meeting. You got back pretty quick. It's like getting dumped out of a boat and then climbing back in, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. Because suddenly I just got that beautiful blue screen telling me that I needed to open everything back up. Okay, so were there any further questions? Were there any further questions on the planning context or future needs? Or are we moving on? Okay. So with the projects, and then I will share my screen on this one. Okay. Okay. So with the project list, and I'm gonna ask Kendra to help out on the development of the project list, because she and Sarah Peters, our project manager, worked extensively on putting this together, and so they can help probably better answer more of the questions. But the development of this project list really pulled from a lot of pre-existing plans and project lists that the city already had. We pulled from the walk and roll plan. We pulled from the city's capital improvement plan. We pulled from the park strategic plan to pull out all of the city's transportation pre-existing projects. And then we added onto it using the policies that we've helped with your help develop to really pinpoint gaps in our system. And so projects, the first project through project, I believe 97, are all projects that have been previously looked at and previously assessed as part of the capital improvement plan, part of concurrency, part of the comp plan.
And that was one of my questions, is if open houses were held for those, and if we'll have open houses for all the new projects that from Project 98 on at some point.
Yeah, and Kendra, we lost Stephen again. I hope he
Okay.
knows it. Why don't you do what you can with Tom's question?
Absolutely. So I actually, just to give maybe even a higher level kind of perspective here, we have about 150 projects that have come out. They've come from a variety of sources. As Stephen mentioned, the first roughly 100 have come from your existing plans, and the additional 50 have come from our other analysis. And to remind you, we talked about sidewalk standards, and we talked about locations where we might expect to have sidewalks on both sides of the street or one side of the street. And what we did as a team is we compared your existing infrastructure that's in place to what we said the standard would be. And we identified locations where infrastructure didn't quite meet that standard. And that's how we created kind of those additional 50 projects beyond what you have today. So I think to the question that was Tom, right? Tom asked, and it was a very good one. How are we going to get community input?
Right.
First of all, I'd say there's another step here that's going to be, I think, very helpful. We have 150 projects, and I think something that we're all painfully aware of is that it's highly unlikely that the city is going to have money to fund all 150 of these projects. So some good questions that we have is, well, how do we decide which projects get funded? And that's really where we do look to that evaluation criteria that we have worked on with all of you and with staff extensively to think about, well, as a part of this MMP, we have identified the things that we think are the most important for Issaquah residents. And the criteria, I actually do want to pull it up again. Just, I know I'm not sharing my screen, but I think it does bear reminding, kind of the things that you have said that are really important. So again, project's ability to.
Yeah, I have the project list up if you want me to share my screen and list.
Sure, the project list, or I was just looking at the criteria that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
How projects
bring up the criteria.
To evaluate to environmental sustainability, how they better connect Issaquah with the region. I think I'm looking for preparing for growth. And I'm not actually, I navigated away, so I don't know if you were sharing your screen, Tom, and that's okay if you're not.
No, I was not. I was going to have you share it.
Okay. And I can try, although I see Stephen's back, so although I could share the content. I have it, I do. I have the ability. Yeah, I don't think I'm succeeding at this. Are you guys seeing? It looks like I'm sharing. You are able to see it. All right. Stephen, I know you've been away. So we were just talking about those 150 projects. And what I was mentioning is kind of the next step is really looking at how these 150 investments, since we know we can't afford all of them, how they match up with these criteria that we talked about. And I think it is really important. I do want to highlight a few, talk about improving mobility within Issaquah and some of the clear things that we're looking at. And we already went through this at a previous item, but I do like, we do have an equity measure, and how we're, really helping folks within the city who maybe don't have as many mobility opportunities to move more efficiently. But we have kind of these six criterion, and out of these six criterion, we have several kind of more objective, quantifiable measures that we're looking at those projects. And so I think to get back to your question, Tom, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can go to things that Stephen or others might want to share. the technical step that's going forward with the consultant team right now, and we're working actually partnership with staff, is we're looking at each and every one of those 150 projects and identifying how well each and every one of those projects advances these priorities. And so the next step is for you all to be for us to come back and report to you or report to the ad hoc committee in terms of what are those projects that are the most consistent. And so again, we know that we can't fund 150, but what is that more discrete number of projects that is affordable within that horizon? And so to your question, in sharing this with the community, if you were to ask me, we'll probably some way it will be possible for the community to see all the different investments we've looked at, but a list of 150 isn't terribly useful. It can be very daunting to look at. It takes a lot of time. And so I think what we're hoping to share with the community is a more focused piece of work saying we've done pretty robust analysis. And here's the investments that we're recommending moving forward with a much more discrete level. And I think at that point, we really do want to hear from the community of this more focused look. Is this generally meeting our needs? Are there major gaps that we're not addressing? And something that I stress, I work with a lot of communities going through a very similar process, is that this kind of more objective, quantifiable process that we've gone through, it helps us to focus. It's a very useful tool, but I think at the end of the day, it does require a human touch to make sure we're not missing things. And I think I want to harken back to Cynthia's comments at the very beginning of this. I think you really, spoke a lot to my heart in terms of thinking about as we're becoming more aware of structural racism in our society, very important considerations. I think, it does, I think, require some thought to make sure that the transportation system that we're recommending as a part of this MMP, is this a transportation system that's really truly creating more mobility opportunities, more safety, more comfort for the full spectrum of the Issaquah community. So I'm going to stop there. I'll give the floor back to the TAB members and Stephen, but hopefully that sort of helped answer that question.
Yeah, I'll go to you, Stephen. Tom had just thrown out a question, so we could continue while we waited for you to come back. Kendra might have said some things that were inspiring you to comment too. Why don't you go ahead and continue where you were?
To be honest, I don't remember where I was, just listening to what the comments and the questions were, and maybe, I was actually really close to kind of concluding, summarizing what the project list is. It's very straightforward in terms of like what it was. The biggest questions for you is trying to figure out, is there anything that you think is missing? Is there anything, particularly the new projects reflects a lot of the new policies that we've discussed, because that's where they came from. Identifying where there's gaps in our sidewalk system, like gaps in our bicycle facilities, or the type of bicycle facilities that need to be at least improved. Does it reflect?
Maybe help out a little bit. I think before your computer crashed, the first time you were just talking about the first 98 where I previously been redded and whatnot, and you're starting to talk about the next group. So I'm not sure if there's anything more to say about along the same lines, just how the next group came about, and those are the ones we're going to be really looking at.
Sure. The only thing I would say about the first 97, 93 projects is that it's been a few years since we've looked at them. We've looked at them as part of the more recent CIP process, but it was more as financial updates, like making sure cost assessments were up to date. But as we move forward, kind of answering the question on what happens next after mobility master plans, we take a better, a closer look at this full project list to determine, some of these projects have been on the CAP or been as part of previous project lists for a really long time. Are they still relevant? And we start having those conversations again. the way our capital improvement program has worked in the past is that we kind of kept a running list going. You know, some projects kind of come off when they're no longer relevant. It's been a while since we've actually gone through that exercise. So I think following the adoption of the mobility master plan, as we continue having those conversations around the full project list and determining what are our higher priorities. With the new project list, I mean, the biggest things to me that I think is missing is taking a little bit closer look at transit improvements and how access to our transit facilities or our transit network can be improved. And it's missing that primarily because we want to save those transit conversations for later when we have a deeper discussion around light rail and what our transit system should look like. And then now I will hand the floor over back to the board on any comments or questions.
Stephen, I don't see any in the chat, but are there any questions about the list? I have a question while you guys think about it. It seemed like there were some questions in the first section, the 1 through 93, that might be items that are already under construction or already been completed. Is this when was this list from? The
projects 1 through 93. It's not necessarily that they're all in construction. They're all under other project lists. So they're either under our capital improvement program, or they're under they were listed in the park strategic plan, or they were identified in our concurrency.
Are there any other questions about the list? I have another question.
This is Tom. Not yet, but it'll probably be something I'd want to have a little bit more time to read through each one of them and kind of relate to where they are and how they tie in the existing project, which I have not done yet.
And thanks, Tom. Looks like Cynthia has a question. Go ahead, Cynthia, you have the floor.
I was just going back through all my emails, and there was one of three, and 3 of 3, and I appreciate that. And I was trying to figure out how I missed. I guess I'm going to ask the dumb question here. This seems like a big body of work that we should spend some time with. I don't know. I don't understand. I guess I'm just not really clear on what we're doing. I understood Kendra's point, and I think that's a really useful exercise. But this is where the rubber meets the road, and I'm not like understanding. I haven't given it the time. Somehow I think I looked at the first 3, and the fourth one was literally hidden, like it was too many in the in the screen, and so it didn't show me there was a. So I haven't studied this. I guess I'm a little bit confused about the process, and it seems like this is pretty important. And so I don't know what to do, because I bet if I spent some time with this, I would have an opinion and there'd probably be robust discussion about it. Am I the only one that's feeling a little overwhelmed and lost by that 950 and ill-prepared?
No, Cynthia, I think that was probably what I was trying to say also, is that to look at these, absorb them, see how they tie in with existing projects, and then exactly what my feedback or comment is supposed to be in regards to the specific projects, or how they relate, or if they fit within the policy or not fit within the policy. I'm not sure what my response or comment back is supposed to be.
Very good, you guys. Sujata or Kobe, do you want to say anything now, or do you want Stephen maybe to talk about what is the expectation, or what is our role in this list? What are you looking for from us?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Stephen about getting some direction based on
Sure.
what Tom and Cynthia have said.
Sure. I mean, the expectation really was just to give you an opportunity to look through the project list before it gets publicly released, because we haven't had a chance to look at this yet. And the opportunity now is to help answer any questions about what's in the project list, what to look for, and in particular, if you have questions about specific projects, where they came from or how they eventually will be scored, but that more specific questions can be answered later on when we actually apply the criteria.
So if I understand, we will apply the criteria to these projects as a group, or is that something we should look at now while we're looking at the projects? So just try to understand them now.
And that's
When I
Kendra
when
was
I
saying. Sorry.
when I say we, I meant the project team is going to be applying the criteria to the project
Mhm.
list, and then we're going to go through it,
Okay.
make sure that we're applying the criteria correctly, and then you'll see the final scoring later.
Okay, so that helps me. You can be applying the criteria. So as I review this, what feedback do you need from me to get to you so that you can have that feedback when you're looking at these and applying the criteria?
It's primarily just looking at helping you understand what the project list is the primary questions I'm looking for.
Emma or Kobe, do you have any comments or questions about the list?
Okay, and it's completely fine if there aren't any questions. We just didn't want to put out a full draft plan in July and not give you an opportunity to see what the project list looks like, particularly around helping you understand what the project list that's going to be coming out.
So that's good. So to help with timing, when would you want comments or any feedback that we have back to you so you have time to process that for your next step?
Once we have final scoring done, we're going to work closely with the ad hoc committee, you, Sujata, and Emma, on taking a look at making sure that the criteria is being applied correctly, or the criteria is being used, or in a way that that the board is really discussed.
Okay. So if you have any comments, do you want it back to you guys, the ad hoc committee, by certain?
I'll follow up with the ad hoc committee with more
Okay.
specific details.
I have a couple quick questions.
Yes.
I think it's good to have a plan reference number. I don't know what's DM and what order are these in?
Where are you looking right now?
Sorry, I'm looking at page 1 of the project, the draft project list.
Mhm.
And there's a column on the right-hand side, 2/3 of the way over, that says plan reference number.
Okay.
Like project 102, there's no reference number.
No, I'm sorry, I'm on page
No.
1, and I was just wondering what DM meant. There must be a plan that's abbreviated DM.
Oh, it's from the concurrency model update, so it's from that project list.
The column before that has an abbreviated DM.
Yeah.
Is
that is the reference number in that project list. So DM2, DM3, DM4, that's the reference numbers.
conferencing model?
I can send you the link.
Not
I see
super
what you mean.
important,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
and then I was wondering also, is there an order to these?
If I may, not yet. So we.
Is it totally random?
Well, not totally.
I didn't think so.
From as they were constructed and compiled. But what I would say is that in the next iteration, when you start seeing these, we can order them based on kind of their point score, because these are coming from such a variety of sources that we've kept for administrative tracking purposes, whether they, if they came from concurrency, they've got a DM. If they came from another plan, they might have a TC. There's different names, and it's really just so that staff has a clear idea of exactly where these came from. But as we start bringing these into the MMP, we'll be stripping out some of that information that isn't really useful to any mere mortal, and ordering things more based on their scoring or based on their geographic location in the city. We've done that. I've done that in communities as well.
Sorry, one of the reasons I asked the question was I was wondering if it had anything to do with how long they've been lying around. Were they getting stale? Were some getting stale?
No, what Kendra said, they really aren't in particular order. It was more about kind of the referencing and how we were ordering for administrative purposes. But the next version will be provided in a more organized fashion.
I think I'll put a quick comment in that we really did look at this as kind of a pencils up exercise today, just to share with you kind of where we are. And I think to the point of, I totally get the question. You've got 150 projects here. You have about 10,000 columns. What are we supposed to do with some of these? And I think it's just more to share with you the general concept of the project list, what we're doing with it, what the origins of it are. And I think in the next step, it'll start being a lot more refined and make quite a bit more sense for this group.
Are there any other questions about the list? I have a really easy one. Softball to you, Stephen. The time frame, this list has concurrency. How far into the future is this view, this list?
How far into the future is the list? Oh,
Yeah.
the projects for build out?
Yeah, projects list. Is this for our growth in the next 30 years? What is it?
In the next 20, I think the full range is like 25 years.
Excellent. Thank you. That helps a great deal. Okay, then there's just a couple more items under this agenda with the map of projects. If you want to introduce us a little to that, and then the sidewalk projects.
Sure. So the map of projects is tied with the reference numbers to that full project list, so you can see geographically where each of the projects are located. And the same goes for the sidewalk. That one is identifying locations of those particular sidewalk projects, as well as the tiers that they're identified for categories. So it's just to help, their reference maps to help with you referencing where all of the projects are located in the city.
Looking for questions from people. Does anyone have a question? Well, you know me, I'm always ready with one. Cynthia, do you have a question?
Nope.
Yeah. Stephen,
Yes.
I was cross-referencing the sidewalk projects with the proposed policies and looking especially at Squawk Mountain about where do we have to have two-sided sidewalks and where do we not have two-sided sidewalks, and that's one example of where these two don't match. So heads up if nothing else, but I found that confusing because they weren't the same.
You're talking about what's on the map versus what's on the ground now?
The two maps are different as referring to where policy would require two-sided sidewalk. The tier 1, tier 2, tier 4 stuff about that, and then the corresponding map that's in the proposed policies, figure 2B, doesn't match this map.
Okay, so I will get together with Kendra to look a little bit closer at all this to make sure they are matching. Thank you for pointing that out.
Not seeing anyone else with any questions. Last call for questions. This is the last item of our agenda tonight. So if you were inspired to ask a question about something earlier in the agenda, now's the time.
I just have a general question.
Go ahead, Emma.
So next time we meet, will that, like, I know nothing's certain with COVID and everything, but do you think it might be in person if it's a month out?
It really depends. I'm planning for a virtual meeting because we really don't know where we're going to be in the phases. It could potentially be an in-person meeting, but if the board has a preference, I think we're going to take that into consideration, because what we don't want to do is force people in a situation to be somewhere they really don't want to be. So we'll have that conversation with the chairs and with our city clerk.
Good question, Emma, and I want to come back to that in just a moment in other business. If you are all ready, I would move into the reports section and see if there is a staff report tonight, Stephen.
I do have a quick staff report. So the first is an item that I had talked to earlier in the meeting on the downtown street closures, and I wanted to help answer any questions about what that is. But just briefly, what we're doing is we're closing down Front Street between Sunset to Dogwood, and closing down Alder between First Ave and First Place. That's that middle crossing street where Subway and Domino's is in downtown. The idea right now is that section of Alder is actually the originally planned Festival Street that was designed in the streetscape plan several years ago. And so we're following that footprint right now. We're adding on Front Street, particularly because of this pandemic, but also, I mean, that is something that was identified as a priority by the Recovery Task Force to be able to support the downtown businesses to expand their outdoor seating so they can better abide by social distancing requirements. Because right now with social distancing requirements, they're fairly, a lot of businesses being downtown, they're fairly limited in their footprint to be able to follow and provide adequate service that makes sense for, you know, the sales they need to maintain their business. So we're trying to expand that outdoor seating so they can do that. And we're working with them by closing the street and setting up barricades around each of the businesses to define where their service areas are. Because we're defining the service areas, the sidewalks are actually going to be closed, and we're going to open up a 20-foot lane down the middle that'll be used for pedestrian and bicycle way through all of downtown. So that way, instead of using the side sidewalks, you'll be able to ride your bike or walk through downtown, essentially using the roadway. And so we'll have wayfinding signage. Each of the areas will be well defined, so you can see where, and each of the businesses will be able to accommodate the outdoor seating. Are there any quick questions about that?
Yeah, when would that be in place?
We are planning to start that actually next weekend. So it'll be, the closure starts Friday, June 26th. It'll start in the afternoon at 2 p.m. And then the roads will open right back up at 10 o'clock Saturday night, or 10:30 exactly, Saturday night.
Oh, so it won't be one day to the evening, it'll be from Friday all the way through to Saturday.
Correct.
Okay.
And then it'll open back up on Sunday. And right now we're going to be doing this for about 2 weeks, monitoring the community impacts to make sure, because it is a pilot, we want to make sure that this isn't negatively impacting, it's actually achieving what we want it to be, which is helping the downtown businesses. And then after that 2 weeks, we're going to determine whether or not we want to continue either a couple weeks more or through the summer.
The question, how is that being advertised to the city and residences both in and out so they can come down and do that, enjoy the restaurants and whatnot?
So some of it's already started to hit social media. We are going to hit social media fairly soon because this was a recovery task force item. It was a new item for staff. So we've been working on it actually pretty hard for the last 4 weeks to be able to pull this together. And the details have been still finalized just this week. So all the heavier advertisement from the city is going to be coming now, but the recovery task force has been talking about this for quite some time. So the idea before the closure is to have electronic signs up when we do the closures, so at least traffic has some clear visibility on Front Street that the road's going to be closed for the weekend. And then we're going to be going social media. We're going to be going online networks to make sure everybody knows what's going on.
Awesome, good. That's because we'll be down there for that, and I'll send a note to our neighborhood here too that it's coming up.
Right, Cynthia had a question about the frequency, or no, can be.
I think I did. I just answered it.
He answered the question.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Stephen. Anything else in the staff report?
My last quick tidbit for staff reports, a bit of a sad one. My manager, Kurt, is actually retiring at the end of July. So we will be down one more on our staff. We're sad to see him go, but I just want to let you all know that that he is planning for retirement. So happy for him, not so much for us.
Boy, I second that. It's been such a pleasure to have him on the staff. He's really such a wealth of expertise and of patience. He's really been great for us, and I hope we have a chance to say goodbye. He's when is his retirement date?
The end of July.
End of July. So you can email him. His email address is on the website, and say congratulations if you like. Yeah. Okay. And then that's your last for the staff report?
That's it.
I have nothing for the chair report, but maybe Cynthia does. Do you have anything?
Nope.
Okay, youth report. Looking at Kobe and Emma. Anything from you?
Actually,
Unless Emma
Nina,
has something, I don't have anything.
Actually, Nina, I was wondering if you could provide a quick update on the recovery task force. I only talked about the one item. Is there anything else that you could probably briefly talk about?
Well, on the spot. They have been fabulous meetings, and I'll tell you the cross section of expertise of volunteers from the city, from people who serve on development commissions, people who serve in parks, and people who serve everywhere. Stephanie from our group is on this task force, and she has been really great to give the point of view of downtown Issaquah, not just retail, but restaurants, some really important businesses. So she's been fabulous to see her there. The mayor runs the meetings, and as Stephen indicated, the use of the information that's coming from the task force is almost immediate. I mean, this is happening now. It's time to go now. It's a really quick and actionable group. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that we have been talking about. I don't think I can come up with it off the top of my head, but they're recorded and you can watch them. And when you watch them on YouTube, you can speed them up to 1.5 speed. But they're not long meetings, and they really are very helpful. So I hope you enjoy them.
You know, on that note,
yes.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tom.
I just had a question for the youth report. That Kobe and Emma, you are both seniors this year?
Yep, we are both heading off to college in the fall.
And graduated. I want to say congratulations on graduation and off to college. And sorry it was such a rough last 2 months of your senior year.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Or I appreciate it.
As do I.
Thank you, Tom. You know, it's so hard to keep track of where we are and what we already did and what we haven't done. And these guys have really, you're right, they've really pulled through. You are going to be greatly missed. The time having you here has been so valuable, though. Really, you've contributed a great deal.
Yeah, I've been on this board since halfway through high school. It's been a long time. Yeah.
Where are you two off to college?
I'm going to UW.
I'm going all the way to Michigan, so Michigan State University.
Michigan State, okay. Oh, good. Well, congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All three, actually, but the third is not here. But yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
Indeed, congratulations and thank you. It's been really great to have you. I don't have anything else. There was one thing, though, that I wanted to share in the discussion about the Front Street is that if you haven't, any of you, signed up for the Notify Me e-letter or email notices, when you go to the main page of issaquah.gov, scroll down just a little bit and look for Notify Me, and you can pick the topics that are of interest to you, and you can pick economic development or transportation or whatever, your neighborhood. I depend on those completely.
Good.
So you can check on those. The last thing of business is when is our next meeting. And Stephen, I want to ask you, it says TBD, when our next meeting is, but also when is the next public, or when, where does the MMP go, even if we're not meeting? Just remind us what's next.
Sure. So after today, the MMP will hit the public release in early July, probably that second week in July. Then it'll be under consideration or review for the city council at their study session on July 28th. And then right now I'm aiming at August 6th for our next tab meeting. I'll send out a poll to make sure everybody's able, so you don't need to tell me now, but just keep that in mind. I'm kind of looking at that date right now. And we probably the third week in August, we're aiming for adoption, or the September 8th.
Thank you, Stephen. Is there any
Mhm.
expectation or desire for any of us to attend the July 28 meeting?
If you would like to, I think I can have a conversation with you and Cynthia about whether or not we can share a lot of the tab as either the staff, you can be part of the staff presentation, or you can be part of public comment leading into this the study session. We can talk about that later on. But I think having the tab voice at the study session would be helpful, whether as part of public comment or as part of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. And in any case, I think that even though that's not on, it's not our meeting, I think we should put that meeting on our calendar, July 28th for City Council.
And I can send out the information to all the tab members to help with.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? Any more announcements? We're over time, but you guys have all been so patient. It's been a long time since we met, so things accumulated. Is there anything else? May I adjourn? I am going to adjourn at 8:11 p.m. Thank you very much. Our next meeting's not until August 6th, but the MMP will live on. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.